Welcome back from the break. I'm Adam Aminu. Who were the Muslims taken to the Americas during the slave trade? What did they take with them and what did they lose? Inspired by the book Servants of Allah by Sylviane Diouf, author Naima B. Roberts, Muslim Bilal and Poetic Pilgrimage answers this for us through the poem Scholars to Slaves.
This is a story of old. It is our story, a story untold.
Once upon a time in a land far away, Africa, we lived free.
Blue, black, deep brown, brick, red and sand. Our people multiplied and covered the land. Fulani, Mandinka, Pio, Pulla.
Our griots sang our stories of kingdoms and cities, and the coming of Islam that united our hearts. For we were Muslims,
African Muslims,
following the call of the Arabian Prophet. We spoke Arabic and wrote it. We read Quran and taught it.
We travelled across the deserts and into trade routes. We passed peasants and sultans as we journeyed to Mecca.
We were farmers and blacksmiths. We were merchants and weavers. We were students and teachers. We were princes and leaders.
but that was all in a land far away, Africa, when we were free. For in many different ways, through kidnap and war, we found ourselves shackled and cast out to sea.
And in ships thick with bodies, with tears and with filth, we called out to God, Allah, to free us from our chains.
Long days and long nights, we rocked in those slave ships. Some died of diseases.
Some met death in the water.
But some of us survived. Our fate was to make it.
To these lands far away, the new world, as slaves.
So, on slave auction blocks, our captors renamed us, stripped us and sold us to work the plantations so far from home, where they beat us and lynched us, shamed us and cursed us as savages to this civilized land.
And yet, through the terror, the pain and the darkness, a bright flame flickered, a flame strong and proud. The memory of Africa and what we had seen and where we had come from and who we had been.
Songs of childhood still beat in our blood. The words of the Quran engraved in our hearts as we traced its letters with sticks in the sand. And we would
pray in brief stolen moments, washing with water, facing the Qibla. We remembered the fast and the ways of our people, and we clung to who we knew we still were deep inside.
For inside we were scholars, students, teachers, traders and weavers, princes and leaders. And in this new land, our fortunes differed.
Some of us ran away. Some died while trying. Some lived as maroons. Some died as slaves. Some became famous. Still more were unknown. Some stayed in the new world. Still others went home.
Those of us who stayed toiled and struggled, sweated and labored to build our new homes. The lands called Trinidad, Jamaica and Cuba, Brazil and Antigua, Virginia and Georgia.
We had children and families that went to our graves, and to our dark graves we took that proud flame, and the memory of whom we had been long ago.
For we had been scholars, students and teachers, traders and weavers, princes and leaders.
We left barely a trace, just a memory, a name, and the shadows of our way in an old Creole prayer.
But that was all in a time long ago, when we were slaves.
And you are our children, and the children of our children, blue, black, deep brown, brick red, and sand.
You met, multiplied, and covered the land. Fulani,
Mandinke,
Puel,
and Pular.
You will again sing our stories, and remember the tales of when you were scholars, students and teachers, traders and weavers, princes and leaders. But this is a story of old, and it is our story, your story, a story now told. For this is a story of old, and it is your story, a story now told.
Very inspiring indeed. And you can catch that again on Naima's website, naimaroberts.co.uk. Now, Film Africa is the Royal African Society's annual London Film Festival celebrating the best of African cinema on the continent and across the diaspora. It's officially launched on Friday with a host of events and viewings to come. Here is more from their trailer. That sounds like a very, very incredible venture there. Well, joining us to discuss a little bit more about that is Isabella Mora-Mendes and Jacqueline Nsia. Thank you so much for coming on Africa this week. If I could just start with you, Isabel, what is Film Africa and how did it begin? And why did you decide to get involved?
Well, Film Africa is an annual film festival, a showcase of the best of African production coming to London every year. It's one of the largest showcases and platforms that we have in the UK. Not the only one for sure, and we work with a number of other festivals across, but definitely one of the most important ones. It started 6 years ago, actually. One academic from Lindiwe Dovey, South African, who was at SOAS. I think she's still working there, but it was just an acknowledgement and recognition of the difficulty that there is when you want to go beyond what is offered to you, kind of ready-made Hollywood and even cinema d'auteur and world cinema. You can see, cinema from Europe coming through. You can see all these different stories, all these different narratives, all these different kind of cultural identities that are being portrayed in the film form. But for you to actually see African cinema, African stories, it was very difficult. It has still to this day, not as easy as one would want, but there was a realization that we could do more, that we could bring them these stories outside of sometimes certain communities like the Nigerian community. We're very good at doing that in an underground way with the Nollywood kind of, circuit of films that goes through the diaspora, as always done since the 80s. But we wanted to bring it, obviously, because the quality of the films that are being produced, the stories, the importance of the stories that are being told, that it's merits coming to the big screen. So we're really happy that we're able to partner with venues like Picture House and others in London, and we're able to bring these stories.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And for yourself, Jacqueline, as well, I know you're part of the team as well. What do you think Film Africa is also trying to achieve?
Well, I think one of the main goals, really, of Film Africa is to showcase African cinema, or the variety and the diversity of African cinema to the London public, like to the diversity, just to showcase like what is happening on the continent, the contemporary stories, the struggles, what the youth and is aspiring to. I think all of that is important to showcase, and Film Africa is doing a great job by doing that.
And I mean, Africa is becoming a bit of a fad now. Everybody wants to, represent it in a good way. It's becoming more trendy. It's becoming more cool, maybe, to be an African as well, which I think it sounds amazing as well. What kind of films are we looking? What kind of narratives are we looking at? I mean, are they diverse, or is it pretty much what most people would expect from a festival like this?
Well, I think that a festival is an opportunity to kind of have a specific focus on something that you're interested in, or something that you don't know and you want to know more of. And as you say, there has been this focus on Africa. Fortunately, like the cultural industries in the continent are really vibrant. So we're talking here about cinema, but we know that in terms of fashion, that we know in terms that in digital as well, there's a lot that is coming through. We just had 154, the Contemporary Art Fair that happened in London, and there's multiple examples. But I think for people to understand who we are better, this idea of the other, which in these times of talking about migration flows, it's really important to understand, who we are, where we come from, what our concerns are, and it brings us closer. And I think what we did with the program this year, we organized some of the strands that we've identified in the stories that filmmakers are offering us this year. And we've organized them in, some of them connected to the migration flows, and so there's a strand around that. The music is another strong element. You can't talk about celebration, you can't talk about the continent without, a smile on your face and people singing. So obviously that's a strong component of our program. We're also looking back at the recent history of South Africa, looking at the 40 years of the student uprising with the double bill that we're screening. So there's definitely a lot for people to unpick, a lot for people to be moved by, to celebrate with us, whether it's music, whether it's the Nollywood films. We're very lucky that this year there are 3 really strong productions coming from Nigeria, and we're very fortunate to have all 3. So we have Nollywood Nights too.
And there's so many other alternative sort of documentaries as well. I mean, we were talking just before the show about the Kenyan film called Kati Kati, I believe it is. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why that is perhaps a favourite of yours from the festival?
Yeah, Kati Kati is a film from Kenya. It's a collaboration with Germany, and it basically looks at life after death. And basically people are in transition, and you slowly through the lead actress, Kelechi, and through other characters, you get to understand how these people got into this transition period. Into this transition life, sorry. And and I think it's quite interesting because it just offers, it's very imaginative and creative, and and he actually looks through those stories at to Kenya's dark past, and I think it's a very creative way of looking at stories, or like tormented stories and past events through a creative way. So I think
that sounds really interesting because, I mean, we know that many of the histories of different African nations have been mired in colonialism, racial injustice as well.
Exactly.
So it's quite interesting that we're still being very honest about our past, but we're making sure that people understand it in a very diverse and different way.
Yeah. And we're telling our own story, which I think is also very good, like through our own eyes and views, which in the past oftentimes has been done through a Western gaze. So I think this is a great time.
I mean, who exactly are you targeting? Who do you want to reach out to attend your festival?
Well, there's something to be said about self-representation. So, and there isn't enough of that, and that's a bit of what we're trying to do as well. You know, I want to see myself represented on screen, and thankfully that is a conversation that has gotten to the Oscars and Hollywood as well. So here we are doing a little bit for, you know, our program is not just with film screenings. We have workshops, we have an industry forum where we invite the diaspora filmmakers who are based in London and the UK to come and talk about the work that they're doing. But we also want the children to come and, you know, see that magical universe that we have, the storytelling, the tales, the oral tradition, put on screen. All of that is really important, and so it's obviously for the communities, the diverse communities that exist in London. There's thankfully quite a healthy demographics around the city that we want to cater for, and that they come. But we also are inviting anyone who has an interest, and we talk about this globalized world, and so that means, you know, looking out and understanding what's out there, and Africa is offering so much, and it will be in the next decades. You know, we know this. We're kind of almost like, you know, we're convinced about it. But if other people are interested, we obviously invite them to come and to engage with us.
I think it's really interesting that you talk about representation, because we've had so many actors, to name a few, David Oyelowo, Ibu Nyong'o, who've talked about you know, the problems of representation, Idris Elba as well. It's not just about putting diverse faces, but making sure we have meaningful roles, isn't it? So how important is the power of film, do you think, in conveying some of these messages?
Well, go ahead.
Oh,
no, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll jump in.
No, it just made me think of voice. Like in the last few months, I guess, this idea of voice is something that has been coming through in a lot of my conversations, and I think what we do with Film Africa is a bit of that. It's just adding that space for us to have a voice, and it's so important, you know.
Yeah, I mean, just maybe also in addition to that, like having our own voice, but also I think it's so important that we tell our own stories and giving our narrative and our view, like for us as a people, but also for the, you know, for the Western audiences. I think it's, just hearing our own, as Isabel already said, the voice is...
Yeah, it's having a space where you have something to say, you have a voice that's recognized, but also then hearing what we have to say, and is what you're saying about, you know, it's not only that, you know, you want to see more brown faces on a film, but you want to understand what those brown faces represent, what they're saying, and they're not, you know, being stereotypical types of roles. They're actually, they have a broader scope of what they can do and what they can offer, and that, I think, we haven't explored as much of that. And so Film Africa gives an opportunity for people to see that, you know. All of the, well, I could say 99% of the actors on screen are going to be African. 99% of the people behind the screen are going to be African, even if they're not, they're reflecting or looking at stories that are very much connected to the continent. So I think even in that, you know, it's kind of unique and innovative.
It's very unique. I mean, so just as a final question, how can people get in touch? How can people get involved? What should they be looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we have a huge online presence. We are on Facebook. We have a Twitter account. We also and we obviously have our own website, which is www.filmafrica.org.uk, where the full program can be seen. And then we also, obviously, we have screenings at 11 venues across London, including the Ritzy in Brixton, Hackney Picture House, Bernie Grant Centre in Tottenham,
South London Gallery, Ciné Lumière.
The BFI South Bank.
Yes.
So yeah, and we have our programs obviously there as well.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with us. Well, we've come to the end of the programme. Thank you to all the guests that have come, and to you at home for watching. Do check out past episodes on islamchannel.tv if you've missed any, and also you can tune into our Facebook and Twitter pages too. We'll leave you with scenes of music lovers and relatives who paid homage to Guinean musician El Hadj Mbadi Kouyate, known as the King of Kora, who died last week. See you again next week at the same time. Thanks for watching.